welcome back to the second video. This is the introduction to data analytics, and to start off with, I would like to thank every single one of you who has shown so much support to my first video, which was the introduction to data analytics, where I spoke about the KDD process, which is also known as the knowledge discovery and database, which is basically used by any sort of data analyst or data scientist when performing any end-to-end machine learning process or problem statement. So yeah, as I told in my last video, that I will be making 7 consecutive videos which will go in detail about the KDD process and will focus on each and every step. So this is the first step of the KDD process that's going to be covered in this video today. But before I can start off with the first step, let's do a little summary of the 7 steps within the KDD process. So I'm just going to write it down. So the knowledge discovery in database. Now this is also known as your KDD process. Now, as many of you know, for all those people who have already watched my first video, that the KDD process consists of 7 steps. So I'm just going to summarize all the 7 steps here. So the first step is business understanding or domain knowledge. The second step is data gathering, collection. The third step is data cleaning. The fourth step is data pre-processing. The fifth is known as your data modeling. Your sixth step is model evaluation, and the final step of the KDD process is your model deployment. Now, this is basically an overview from the first video of what the KDD process is. Now, for those of you who have not watched my first video, I would really recommend that you go and watch my first video, where I just give an overview of what each and every step involves. So today we'll be focusing just on the first step of the KDD process, which is known as the business understanding and the domain knowledge. So today our main focus would be on business understanding and domain knowledge. Now, what do you understand by business understanding or domain knowledge? Now, in its literal sense, what business understanding means is understanding any business from A to Z. So let's consider Netflix, because I think this was the example I gave when I was initially explaining the KDD process in my first video. So let's take Netflix as an example. Now, consider yourself as a data analyst who's working on this particular project where you have to work with, let's say, Netflix as a company. Now you're a data analyst and you approach, or your company approaches Netflix to try and solve a specific problem that they may have. Now let's consider that Netflix has a problem. Now this problem is that, let's say, the recommendation system that they have, they want to improve that. Now, for those of you who don't know, the current uh, root mean square error for the recommendation system that Netflix uses is around 85.4%, and which is not bad. It's actually an improvement from the previous Cinematch recommendation system that used to use. That Cinematch recommendation that they had, it produced an error rate of 90%. Now, when so for those of you who don't know, that Netflix actually held a competition back in 2006 2007 where they invited a lot of companies or teams to participate to help them improve the recommendation system. So a lot of companies took part in that competition, and most of the companies managed to reduce the error rate. I think it was 90 or 95%. I don't remember from the top of my head, but it was around the 90s and the error rate. And most of the companies, what they try to do is to lower the error rate. And one of the companies, or one of the teams that actually won the $1 million reward by Netflix, they managed to reduce the error rate to 85%, which was a significant improvement. Now, let's say, now this was just a story that I wanted to tell you guys, but keeping everything aside, now let's say you're a data analyst and you go to Netflix and they have a recommendation system that they want to improve. Now let's say that they have a current recommendation system which is producing 85% error rate. Okay, now they have asked you to make a model or do something to reduce the error rate to, let's say, 83%. Okay, and they want to increase the overall accuracy by, let's say, 5% of the model. Now let's say if the current accuracy is 80%, they want to make the accuracy 85%, and they have hired you as a data analyst to work something out to build this particular model. Now this is just a backstory of what a problem statement may look like when you initially meet the client, and try to understand their business problem. So this is one part of business understanding where you try to understand the um, the problem statement. So this can also be categorized as your problem statement. Now, once you have understood your problem statement, okay, so this is the two main problems that they have, and you want to solve this problem. Now, in order to solve this particular problem, you need to understand how Netflix work. Now, this is where business understanding really comes into picture. So, business understanding. Now, in business understanding, what you are trying to do as a data analyst is to understand how Netflix really works. Now, you would be interested to know, how the management works. Management, you would like to know what type of deals they have had in the past. So by deals, what I mean is what type of movie directors they like to work with, etc., etc. Other part of Netflix that you would want to understand, within the first business understanding stage is, actually understanding how your recommendation how your recommendation system work. And this recommendation system is not any recommendation system. Well, recommendation systems are general in nature because there are two or three techniques to actually make a recommendation system. But what you need to understand as a data analyst is how Netflix uses its recommendation systems. Now, um, you know, because I've already written my thesis paper on recommendation systems, I know that Netflix uses um hybrid recommendation systems. Okay, now that Netflix is using hybrid recommendation systems, this is one part of business understanding that you have acquired, that okay, Netflix is using hybrid recommendation systems. Now let's say if you want to dive much deeper into the process of recommendation systems, you can probably sit with the domain expert from Netflix who can actually explain to you how their recommendation systems actually work. Now, why is it important to sit with the domain experts? Because the domain experts would give you insights as to how the recommendation systems are working for Netflix. They would tell you what are the different criterias they have taken for modeling. Now, for example, let's say you are sitting with a domain expert and he gives you one of the insights. Let's say that they are using the singular value decomposition algorithm for recommendation systems, and let's say they say that they have a matrix. This is basically a matrix factorization technique. Now let's say that when you're sitting with a domain expert, they tell you that okay, this is the algorithm that's currently being used, this is the matrix factorization technique, and they give you a criteria that's been set by Netflix. Let's say they say that we have let's say they have a user item. Let's say they have a user rating threshold of, let's say, 0.5%. Okay, now as a data analyst you would be baffled. You would be like, okay, what does user rating threshold really means? Now this is where you and the domain experts can sit one to one, and actually have this conversation. Okay, now let's say you're sitting with a domain expert and he really explains you what user rating is. Now this is another insight, another type of data that you have gathered about the business. Now when you're sitting with this domain expert, he's going to give you many such insights about how the company is working, or how their particular model works, or what type of different criterias they have used for that specific model. Now these will really help you when you're trying to make the model, or when you're working on the pre-processing part of it, when you're working on the data transformation part of it, when you're working for feature construction, or when you're working on feature extraction. These type of one-to-one conversations with the domain experts would really help you understand that business better. Now I'll just quickly go into a little detail of how these conversations could be. Let's say the domain expert for Netflix tells you that they use a hybrid recommendation system which uses a user rating threshold of, let's say, 0.5%. Now you would wonder, okay, you can ask questions like, okay, what does a user rating threshold mean? Now the domain expert would tell you that a user rating threshold is basically the number of movies a user has rated in the data set. Okay, now let's say if there are uh, 10,000 movies in the data set. It's just a very hypothetical number. Let's say there are 10,000 movies in the data set, and you have a user rating threshold of, let's say, 0.5%. So what this really means is that in order to uh, consider a sample for modeling, 0.5% of 10,000 should be the number of movies that a user should be rating. So let's say um, okay, let me give you an example here. Consider this, okay, as all the movies in the data set. Consider this as 10,000 movies in the data set. Okay, now when you put a 0.5% threshold, you would be taking a sample of this data. Okay, you would have a xyz number, and this xyz number is nothing but 0.5% of 10,000. You would have a sample, and then this sample you would take for pre-processing and for modeling. So basically these are some insights that you can gather when you sit with such domain experts. So this was just a brief example to make you understand of what type of conversations you could have with domain experts, or what type of let's say insights you may get from these domain experts. And so this was just a very basic example of what business understanding is, and how business understanding really works in real world. And this was just a basic example for Netflix. Now but this business understanding and domain knowledge and understanding more about the business basically applies to any industry. You can have your insurance, you can have finance, you can have healthcare. So it basically works in any sort of industry. If you are someone who does not have the domain knowledge, so let's consider this as yourself, and let's say if you don't have any domain knowledge, then there are various ways to acquire that knowledge. You can firstly um, get some domain expert and understand what or how the process really works. You can do your own research, and Google is basically your best friend when it comes to this. I will talk about recommendation systems as an example in a very separate video, and I will actually talk about how I went about doing my entire master's thesis, and how I did the research, how I understood the processes, how I acquired the domain knowledge for recommendation systems. So I think that would give you guys a little clarity, and it will help you understand as to, if tomorrow you don't have a domain expert, okay, then how can you acquire knowledge. So research is, and Google is basically your best friend in this case. So this was just a brief overview of what business understanding and domain knowledge is all about. I hope this was something that helped you. If you guys have any questions, please leave that in the comment section below. What I will do is basically make a Dropbox, as I said in my first video, make a Dropbox, or make some sort of cloud link where I can share all these notes with you guys. So once again, thank you so much. If you have stayed so far and if you have listened, thank you so much for being here. And once again, thank you so much for all the support that you have given to me on my YouTube channel. And if you know someone who is really interested in data analytics, data science analytics, or who is having some sort of a career change path, or who is someone just curious to learn more about analytics, then do tag them or do share this video with them. And till next time, keep learning, and I will see you in my next video, where I will cover the second step of the KDD process. So thank you so much once again, and I hope to see you guys very soon. Bye bye.